"Get out," he said, arms crossed, voice steady. Right there in front of Mira's lilacs hours after we buried her. Name's Raylan Booth, builder 62. Still had dirt on my shoes, hers actually. And a hotel keycard sweating cold in my coat pocket. Ever been erased by your own kid before the will cooled? Tell me how you handled it. He said it with his arms crossed, barely looking me in the eye. Get out. I thought Calder meant the car. He meant my life. I didn't argue. There wasn't much left to fight for, and I'd never been good at making a scene, especially not with my own son. The door clicked shut behind me with the same finality Mira's had when we lowered her into the earth 2 days ago. I stood there in the driveway, my coat collar turned against the Kansas wind, watching their porch light blink on, automatically an efficient motion sensor upgrade I'd installed last summer. The envelope Calder had handed me was still warm from his hand. Inside, a single hotel voucher printed like a coupon. One night at a place off Route 50 where the walls were thin and the towels smelled like bleach. A courtesy check-in note scrawled not in Calder's hand, but Soretta's. We hope this allows space to begin the transition gently. Gently. I placed the envelope in my coat pocket next to Mira's recipe card, the one she'd left inside a volume of Auden poems, folded twice along the corners. If they ever forget who you are, remember who you were. A drizzle settled in, more cold than wet. The kind of rain that didn't need permission, just persistence. I stepped away from the house without looking back. It took me longer than I thought to reach Main Street. My legs hadn't yet learned to walk without purpose. The canvas bag in my hand wasn't heavy, but it ached just the same. Inside, neatly wrapped in one of Mira's old tea towels, were her gardening shoes, still caked with dried soil from the lilac bed she tended in spring. I passed the bookstore where Mira once ran weekend readings for kids. Closed. Lights off, windows streaked with condensation. Farther down, the hardware store, where I'd once known every screw and washer by code. Someone had repainted the trim without matching the shade. People nodded at me politely if they noticed at all. I didn't blame them. Grief shrinks a man's silhouette. By the time I reached Delia's bakery, my feet were beginning to protest. It was 6:05. The lights were dim, the chairs turned on tables. I stood outside the fogged glass for a moment, reading the sign taped crookedly to the door. Back at it tomorrow, come hungry. I sat down on the bench outside Mira's shoes beside me like silent witnesses. The sky pressed low. The wind tasted like old apples and smoke. I adjusted my coat, dug my hands deep in the pockets, and waited for something I couldn't name. The door opened behind me with the faint jingle of a bell I hadn't heard in years. You look like a man who forgot he built half this town, said Delia, standing in the doorway with her apron smudged in flour. Her hair was tied back the way it always was, practical, no nonsense. I turned slowly. Might be I forgot. Or maybe I just wasn't looking. She tilted her head. You hungry? I'm not sure. That's a yes. She disappeared back inside, returned with a wax paper bundle that smelled like roast turkey and cracked pepper. No fuss, no condolences. Just bread meat and warmth. When she handed it to me, I took it with both hands. She held my gaze a second longer than needed. You're staying upstairs, she said. Don't argue. I didn't. She nodded toward the side entrance, tossed me a brass key fob with a faded 2B stamped into it, then vanished again, the door swinging shut behind her with the same creak it had 20 years ago. I sat there a while longer before going in. The sandwich was still warm in my lap, and the bench creaked softly beneath me. Somewhere deep in my coat pocket, the corner of Mira's recipe card poked out just enough to remind me it was still there. Maybe tomorrow I'd find the courage to read it again. I didn't sleep. It was too quiet above the bakery. The hum of mixers and ovens from below had always been a comfort during the years Mira and I would stop by Delia's on market mornings. But now the absence of that sound, just a faint drip from the old sink, the radiator ticking like a watch too slow, was unsettling. I kept thinking I'd wake up and be erased. No records, no traces, just a name removed from a mailbox and a story cut short. Delia had left a thermos of coffee on the kitchenette counter next to a small note, sugars inside. Heat it up before you leave. And under that, almost as an afterthought, I've seen sweet boys turn cold. Grief doesn't always soften. It was Mira's handwriting I wanted to see, not Delia's. but kindness in whatever form it came had become rare currency. By 7:15, I was at the gate of Ridgeview Storage. Unit 7B, the one Mira insisted we keep, even when I argued the monthly fee was wasted on nostalgic clutter. She'd smiled that spring afternoon. Some things need to rest outside the house, she'd said, just in case. The storage key was on my old ring, the same one that still held a gym tag from 2006. The lock clicked open with a satisfying resistance. Inside, the smell hit first cardboard motor oil and the faint tang of pine cleaner. Light slanted through the small vent high up on the roll-up door. Dust swam in and out of it like minnows. I flipped on the bare bulb and saw stacks of labeled boxes, some familiar, some cryptic. One crate simply said, "Boys' art, do not toss." I passed those, stepping carefully. Toward the back, wrapped in a moving blanket, was a low metal case with Mira's neat label stuck to it. House finances keep. I knelt, heart thudding louder than it needed to. The hinges groaned. Inside, tax folders, ledgers, a spiral notebook edged with sticky notes. Mira's handwriting looping around phrases like, "Ask Raylan and keep for audit." There was the dry ink smell of ballpoint pens and a smudge where she'd corrected a 9 into a 0. One folder sat heavier than the others, marked Booth Deed Original, our Raylan's copy. Tucked beside it was a photo, Mira in her gardening gloves holding up a bunch of lilacs. On the back, written faintly filed, same day, 4/22/19. I sat down on an overturned milk crate and opened the manila folder with slow fingers. There it was, the original deed, paper thin, undigitized with a raised county seal, dated, signed, and stamped. It confirmed what I remembered and what I feared would be overwritten joint ownership of the house, Mira and me. No mention of Calder, no addendums. I held it for a long time, the edges warm from my grip. Beneath the folder was a slim notebook, her handwriting again on the cover, "Start again. But only if they deserve it." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Mira always had a flair for dramatic titles. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a low reminder that the world outside still moved. I took a photo of the deed, carefully centered with the seal, catching light, then emailed it to myself and backed it up to the cloud. As I zipped the folder shut again, something tugged at the corner of my eye. A reflection. I turned slightly, just enough to catch the edge of the mirror propped against the wall, left over from some long-forgotten furniture set. In the glass behind me, Mira's gardening shoes, still on the floor, but turned now facing me. I hadn't moved them since last night. I closed the case, stood slowly. The light buzzed overhead. My breath came in clouds, though it wasn't quite cold enough for that. A trick of nerves, maybe. On my way out, I paused by the photo one more time. Mira's smile in that picture wasn't posed. It was the one she saved for when she was proud. You don't just swing by for forensic help, Ray. Margin opened the door holding 2 mugs and one eyebrow raised. Steam curled from both cups, one labeled, "Don't rush me, I'm auditing." I hadn't called ahead. Some things you don't schedule, like a confession or a panic. I followed her inside, past a coat rack that hadn't seen a coat since Obama's first term, and into the den she'd turned into her lair. Half IRS war room, half yarn jungle. "Still drink it black?" she asked. I nodded, setting my canvas bag down with care. Mira's notebook was inside the spine, already splitting. "You look like someone who slept on regret," she said, handing me the mug. "More like anxiety foam," I replied. We sat at her work table, surrounded by spreadsheets thumbtacked to corkboards and walls. Her cats, Moose and Penny, ignored me as cats do. A small space heater clicked beside us like an impatient metronome. I pulled out the scanned deed and copies of Mira's trust documents. "I think they're trying to wipe me out," I said, voice lower than intended. Margine didn't blink. "Well, that makes 3 of us who thought that." She flipped through the stack, her red pen already uncapped. I watched her underline a date, October 9th. That's 2 weeks before Mira went into the hospital. "You sure this update request came from her? Soretta submitted it." She grunted. Of course she did. Passive voice, no signature, looks like it was typed in a rush. And no witness initials. I passed over Mira's audit book, the one she insisted on keeping, even after we digitized everything years ago. Margine scanned the margins. Mira's cursive was unmistakable, sharp peaks, generous spacing, a habit from learning on a manual typewriter. Then Margine paused. She flipped to a page folded slightly at the corner one with a pale yellow sticky note clinging for dear life. She read aloud, "If he does it, it'll be after the funeral. That's when they always strike." Her voice didn't crack, but something under it did. I let the silence hang. It felt earned. "She wrote that 2 months ago," I said. Margine didn't respond at first. She pressed her pen to her lips, then to the sticky note. "We timestamped this," she murmured. "Scan it, log it, and save it in 3 places. Then we backdate the metadata chain to show provenance." I blinked. She smirked. "You came to me, Ray. We play this my way." We moved through the morning and practiced silence. She brought out her old scanner, the one we used during the 2008 audit season, and we captured everything: deed notebook, sticky notes, even the doodle Mira had drawn on the back of an envelope. As she worked, I caught glimpses of Calder's old emails on my phone. In one dated October 11th, he wrote, "Let's keep this moving." Mom's wishes were always clear. No attachment, no signature from Mira, just confidence. "You know," Margine said while naming files, "grief doesn't always soften people. Sometimes it polishes their worst instincts to a shine." I sipped my now cold coffee. "Soretta always liked clean paperwork," I muttered. She raised an eyebrow. "That smells like foreshadowing." I didn't laugh, but the corner of my mouth did twitch. When we'd finished, she tapped the folder on the desk. "You still own half that house, maybe more." I wanted to believe her. Wanted the math to stand against the emotion, but something else tugged at me deeper than property lines. As I stood to leave, I turned back to the table. Mira's audit book was still open. I leaned in to close it, and just before the cover fell shut, I saw another note tucked deep in the back sleeve. "Start again, but only if they deserve it." The pen stroke was fainter, the corners brittle. I folded it and slipped it into my coat. It felt like a compass and a dare. Some folks use lawsuits. I used email, with receipts, and a delay send feature which felt oddly ceremonial. The public library still smelled like carpet glue and crumbling encyclopedias. The same faded green booths, the same creaky wheels on microfilm drawers. But this morning, sunlight hit the old monitors just right, making everything look less like a dead end and more like a chessboard. I settled into a corner booth facing the wide front windows. Across the street, I could see the booth in freshly repainted glossy white trim, mocking the chipped shutters Mira used to polish herself. They hadn't asked. Of course they hadn't. I opened my laptop, fingers hovering. Subject line: booth property, legal notice body. "Dear Calder and Soretta, attached is a scanned copy of the original deed showing joint ownership between Mira and myself. The timestamp is verified, and the document predates any update requests. Note: Mira's final audit book includes her handwritten statement anticipating post-funeral changes. Given the irregularities in the updated trust and absence of her signature on key documents, I am preparing formal legal action unless acknowledgement is received within 72 hours. R. Booth." I attached the scanned deed, zoomed in on Mira's signature, still sharp, but you could see where the ink had faded in the loop of the M. I circled it in red digitally. Not for drama, just clarity. I added 2 screenshots, one of the notarized file with date metadata, and one from Mira's audit book with her note. "That's when they always strike." Delia had asked over breakfast. "So what happens if they ignore it?" I had said, spoon halfway to my mouth. "Then they confirm everything." 6:42 p.m. had been Mira's number, her birthday, her locker, the time of our first anniversary dinner reservation. It wasn't magic, but it was ours. I scheduled the email to send at exactly that time. Then I closed the lid. The quiet in the library was thick, almost reverent. No cell phones. Just the hum of scanners and the occasional squeak of sneakers on wax tile. I let myself breathe. Not deeply, just enough. Outside, traffic passed. A couple teens took selfies in front of the mural Calder had commissioned last summer. It showed the inn with exaggerated charm, like it was a place out of a movie instead of the site of my slow erasure. I stared at the painting longer than I meant to. When I blinked again, the library printer behind the desk kicked to life. A chill went through me. I opened the laptop. The reply had come early, Subject Rebooth Property Legal Notice, Raylan. Let's resolve this privately. No need to involve the courts. We believe there's been some confusion and we want to preserve the family's reputation. Let's talk. No apology, no admission, just concern about optics. I read it 3 times. Each one tasted different, saltier, colder, quieter. I closed the laptop and tucked it into my bag. The sun had begun its slow dip westward, throwing gold light across the booths. As I left the library, I glanced once more at the inn. Paint still fresh, porch railings sanded and replaced. But it wasn't the trim that caught me, it was the man on the porch. Middle-aged denim vest, cup of coffee in hand. He nodded toward me. "Hey," he said. "You the guy who built this place?" I stopped. He had kind eyes, but also the kind that watched, the kind that remembered. I didn't answer, just adjusted the strap on my shoulder and walked on. But my chest felt a little fuller. Not with pride, with proof. The sign was crooked, nailed with old screws, second hearth, est quietly. I didn't even center the letters properly. Mira would have made me redo it twice. But something about the tilt felt honest. Real warmth never arrives in straight lines. It was late April by the time I opened the door without flinching. Spring in Kansas isn't always kind, but this year it arrives soft. Gentle drizzles, moss, waking up in the cracks between bricks, lilacs blooming a few weeks early. The little cottage on the edge of Emporia looked less like a business and more like a secret someone had forgotten to keep. I'd first seen it with Mira years ago. We were collecting wild mint for a church potluck lemonade, and she stopped to admire the slope of the porch roof. That house wants to hold people, she had said, as if houses had longings too. It had been a rental for years. Then empty, then mine. Delia pulled up in a dented truck with an armoire strapped down by Faith and a single bungee cord. She brought fig jam, a rusted tea tin, full of buttons, and a half-done crossword clipped to the sun visor. "You don't build a haven with money," she said, unloading. "You build it with elbows and crumbs." We got to work. The floors creaked in friendly ways. Windows were washed. The walls took a coat of sage green that Mira would have called sensible. The kitchen, no bigger than a motel alcove, held her kettle and the jar of sugar she used to label "for guests only." I let it stay, label and all. I didn't advertise. No sign on the road. Just a quiet note to a retired librarian, a handshake with a school nurse, a folded recipe card, slipped to a widower at the post office. Word spread the way bread rises slowly, warmly by touch. The first to come was a woman named Erlene, early 60s, widow from Arkansas. She arrived with a purple duffel arthritis cream and no expectations. Said she was tired of casseroles and people saying grief takes time, like it was aspirin. She stayed 3 nights, sat on the porch every morning with coffee and an old paperback. The second day she left a $10 bill on the counter. The third a note on a recipe card. Didn't know kindness could be this quiet. "Bless you, Mr. Booth." The next week a hospice nurse showed up. Early 30s, eyes like glass before a storm. She didn't speak much, just cleaned the windows without asking, brewed tea every night. One morning the toast popped and she cried like something had tapped a crack in her. We didn't talk about it. Delia came often. She brought scraps of fabric stories from the bakery, and one morning a quilt I didn't recognize. Her last stitching, she said. Told me to save it for when you finally came back to yourself. I laid it over the guest bed. The stitches were small even. On the back corner, MB in Mira's hand. That was when I cried, not loudly, but all the way through. I made no speeches, just started calling it what it was, a place people could stay. Not a business, not a shrine, just a second hearth. One morning, after sweeping the porch, I picked up Mira's gardening shoes. I'd cleaned them gently, mud flaked off, but the heels still held a trace of lilac scent. I placed them beside the porch post under the mint pot she once carried in a ceramic bowl. I didn't say anything, didn't need to. That day, the hospice nurse paused on her way out, saw the shoes and whispered, "Thank you." I wasn't sure if it was to me or to her. Maybe both. They kept coming quietly. One man fixed the leaky pipe. A teenage girl left a folded drawing of the house on the windowsill. A woman in remission asked if she could plant something. I said yes. And then someone posted a review online. I didn't know we had one. Stayed where kindness was real. Booth wasn't gone, just hiding. It hit me harder than I expected. Not because it was flattering, but because it was true. I hadn't disappeared. I just stepped outside the frame Calder and Soretta tried to paint me into. That night after dinner, I found a letter in the mailbox. No envelope, folded clean with my name in Calder's hand. Dad, you should have told me. Calder, that was it. No return address, no plea, just those 7 words pressed into paper like they'd cost him something. I sat on the porch for a long time, quilt over my knees, shoes beside me, the mint releasing its scent in the evening air. Inside, the kettle creaked on the stove. A guest laughed softly upstairs, and the crooked sign outside, half lit by the porch bulb, swayed just enough to feel alive. The email came with a ping that cracked the afternoon. Subject: brand dilution concern. From Soretta Booth, Executive Liaison. Booth Legacy Ventures, LLC. I read it twice before setting the phone down on the porch rail. She still scented her words with lilac and legalese, a trick she learned from Mira, perhaps though Mira used that scent for linens, not lawsuits. Dear Raylan, it began. We are aware of a property known as Second Hearth, using the Booth name and likeness. While we appreciate your dedication to family legacy, any usage not sanctioned by Booth Legacy Ventures may be considered a breach of intellectual property protections. We urge resolution before further action becomes necessary. No hope you're well. No mention of Mara. Just a pressurized kindness vacuum sealed. I leaned back in the porch chair and looked out at the mint patch near the stump, the old walnut tree Mira had always refused to cut until it split in a storm. The base remained sanded and solid, a memory with rings. Delia arrived an hour later, arms full of lemon bars and opinions. She's bluffing, she said, no greeting needed. Legacy Ventures can't claim kindness, not when it was Mira's name her work. You just stood still long enough for it to bloom. I poured us tea. The sun played on the porch floorboards, shadows of rocking chairs creaking in rhythm. A guest upstairs practiced soft chords on a ukulele. In that quiet, I remembered Margine's advice: if she pushes, don't shove, just stand. So I did. That night I wrote Soretta back. Second Hearth is not for profit and not for sale. It uses no branding, but memory. The Booth you knew built empires. The Booth I knew built rooms warm enough for silence. I included no signature, just Raylan. The next day I visited Margine. She wore a sweatshirt with a cat and a tie and offered no apology for the lemon bars crumbling in her pocket. Technically, she said through a mouthful, there's no infringement. You're not marketing, not monetizing the name, you're reclaiming it. We drank bitter coffee and reviewed the original deed again just because. Later, back at Second Hearth, I went to the stump. The idea came uninvited, like grief or grace. I pulled the walnut plank from the shed. It still had Mira's paint marks from when she'd planned garden trellises. I sanded it lightly, not enough to erase her touches. Then slowly I carved Second Hearth, in honor. No surname, no claim, just purpose. I nailed it to the porch post where her shoes once stood. That evening I noticed a stone on the rail, then another. One had "thank you" in faded Sharpie. Another was painted with a daisy. Guests had begun to leave these things without a word. Quiet gratitude shaped and left like offerings. A woman I recognized, hospice nurse, mid-30s, returned just before sunset. She said nothing, just sat in the porch chair Mira once used, looked at the garden and left. No booking, no bag. When I checked the mailbox there, it was a single rose pink and starting to wilt. Mira's favorite, pinned there with a wooden clothespin. I didn't move it. I didn't have to. The next morning, Delia knocked with a clipboard and a smirk. You've got a wait list, Ray. One woman wants to come in. July says she hasn't written in years and needs 4 weeks and silence. She leaned in. Do you want to start charging? No, I said. She grinned. Didn't think so. The sun caught the new sign as she left, lighting up the word honor, like it had been waiting for morning all along. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting for a house. I was tending a fire. I lit the porch lamps Mira used to hate. Too yellow, she'd say, narrowing her eyes, as if their glow misrepresented the world. But tonight it felt right, not because they were beautiful, but because they were honest, soft, uneven, and perfect, like memory. It was Mira's birthday. The air had that end of August hush where every breath carries the last heat of summer and the first lean of autumn. Crickets throbbed in the garden beds. Fireflies blinked like shy applause. And for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't waiting for something awful. Delia arrived early, wrapped in her grandmother's shawl, carrying lemon cake in one hand and an old Polaroid in the other. She handed me the photo without a word. Mira elbows deep in compost, a tulip stuck behind her ear, like a child playing florist. I smiled, blinked hard, and nodded toward the side table. Put it next to the jam. Margine came next with a box full of clinking jars and a folding chair that creaked like an old confession. I made meatloaf, she announced, but if anyone asks, it's heritage brisket. She winked and went to the back porch where she arranged paper lanterns like she was defending a thesis on gentle lighting. We hadn't sent invites, just whispers, just enough. By dusk, the house was full, but not crowded. Guests floated in, each carrying something that wasn't quite a dish, but more than a gesture. The retired welder brought cherry cola and a set of dominoes. The high school teacher from Mira's district offered a jar of pickled beets and a folded letter she'd never sent. The pianist from Topeka brought silence, and when she finally played, even the wind slowed to listen. We served ourselves, sat on mismatched chairs, and talked in the kind of tones people save for quilts and graveyards. No one made speeches. I sure as hell didn't. But someone I forget who asked, "What does a hearth mean to you?" No one jumped in. Then the pianist said, "It's the place that lets you sit down without proving you deserve it." Delia raised her cup. To that, I stepped away before the applause could stretch into something awkward. The garden called me like it used to call Mira, quietly, insistently. Without flowers or apology, I stood by the lilacs. The trellis leaned more than I remembered. The soil smelled of old leaves and forgiveness. I didn't pray. I didn't even think hard. I just whispered thanks. And then I saw him, Calder, standing beyond the garden fence just where the light surrendered to the trees. No suit, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled. His arms hung loose, not crossed. His face didn't hold anger, just a long-held question with no punctuation. He didn't come closer. He didn't speak. He only stood there, watching. After a long moment, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle, set it down by the gate like an offering, then turned and walked away slow and straight. I waited until the last lantern dimmed, until the guests faded into the night with quiet nods and half-empty jars, until the porch creaked the way empty rooms do when they're remembering people. Then I opened the bundle, a book. Booth Legacy, Notes by C.B. Hardbound. Not new, not quite finished. Calder's initials stamped without flair. Inside, tucked into the opening flap, was a pencil. Short, dulled, nearly useless. But I knew it. It was Mira's. The one she used to scribble seed orders and scold me in the margins of property forms. Page 42 was marked. A sticky note in Calder's handwriting said, "I didn't know. Now I do." Mira had underlined a single sentence. Truth lives longer than love sometimes. And in the margin, her tiny handwriting like thread, pulled tight only if it's spoken. I sat for a long while, holding that page, listening to the crickets, the sigh of the house, the weight of things unspoken starting to crack open like seeds. When I finally stood, I walked to the porch rail, took Mira's gardening shoes, the ones still caked with the dirt she refused to rinse, and placed them there. Not for nostalgia, not for grief, for blessing. They faced the road, they waited, they welcomed. No check, just a note inside the envelope. "You gave me back time." Signed MB. I ran my thumb along the handwriting. Mira's initials repurposed, recycled, by someone I hadn't even met. No stamp on the envelope, just a quiet wait in the mailbox, tucked between a grocery flyer and a coupon for roofing services. The paper had the smell of attic dust and lemon balm. A sapling had been planted that morning. I didn't know who placed it in the corner plot, but when I asked the little girl, barefoot knees, grass-stained, simply said, "So someone can sit under it later." That was the whole reason, apparently, and maybe the only one that mattered. The porch had begun to wear down in places, the top rail pale from sun, one of the steps slightly loose, but that seemed right. Things used often should carry the weight of use. Inside, the guest ledger had reached page 243. Some entries were full letters, others just names, but most signed with a single letter. DJB1 said only still healing. Another came angry, left softer. I no longer made speeches. No longer explained the mission or the name. They understood when they walked the path, when they sat with a mug warmed in Mira's old saucer, when they heard the creak of the screen door or saw the faint carving on the porch post. It said simply, "Second hearth in honor." Delia had baked again. Her lemon loaf too moist in the middle, but glazed like a sermon. She brought it in without knocking, placing it beside the logbook, with the casual grace of someone who never left. Margine followed with a new tin of tea bags, and her usual roll of her eyes. "I'm just here to make sure you haven't converted this place into a yoga retreat," she muttered, though she left a small envelope of lemon balm seeds on the windowsill before she left. That afternoon, a guest from the nursing center returned. He had been here a year ago, silent then, and mostly silent now, but today he brought a book. Mira's copy of Walden Edge's Curled and Underlines Neat. He said nothing as he handed it to me. Inside was a short note in careful hand. "She reminded me it's okay to start again. You reminded me it's okay to stay." I placed the book on the shelf near the tea tins. Above it, Mira's old pencil still rested in a groove, the same one Calder had returned tucked into the book he left during Hearthlight night. The initials MB plus RB, still here, had been carved below the rail weeks ago in the soft grain between nail heads. I ran my finger across them now. They were holding. Out by the porch, a child crouched near the base of the new sapling, gently patting the soil. She picked up a small flat stone, the kind Mira used to place at the edges of her lilac bed, and carried it over to the bench. She looked up at me and said, "This is for her, so she knows," then placed it gently in the center of the bench, her tiny fingers careful not to drop it. It joined 3 others already there, one with a scribbled heart, another with the initials GB, and one with a single word. "Thanks." I nodded, not because I agreed, not because I needed to teach anything, but because it was enough. All of it, the shoes still by the garden box, the quilt on the back of the rocker, the fig jam stains on the mailbox, the porch lamp with its yellow glow. Mira always teased it was enough. Before sunset, I added one more packet to the wooden garden box, Lilac Mira's Mix, her handwriting again fading but intact. The last packet she saved dated 2 springs ago, taped shut, with a sliver of washi tape patterned like leaves. I didn't open it, just tucked it beside the others under the ridge of the box, knowing that someday someone would find it, and maybe, just maybe, they'd plant it. The last light fell over the porch, casting long shadows across the logbook and the sapling near the rail. Someone had left a stone again, this one with a hand-drawn daisy and the word "still." I didn't move it. Some things deserve to stay where they land. Turns out justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes through fig jam, on a chipped plate, a child's quiet question, or a pencil left in a book. Mira built warmth. I just left the door open long enough for others to feel it. Have you ever found your second hearth or helped someone else find theirs? If the story stirred something in you, feel free to share your thoughts or even subscribe to hear more like it.